So for our last presentation today, we don't need much of an introduction for this audience, which is probably pretty good for me since I didn't write an introduction for you, Lisa. So if you want to start making your way here. But Dr. Lisa Tokach is going to come and give some discussions with us here. With the retirement of a good and close friend, Steve Henry, this last fall, we thought Lisa was a perfect person to come and give some comments, considering she's spent her working lifetime side by side Steve. So it'll be interesting to see what kind of pictures and stories, and I don't know if you got any songs in this one or not, Lisa.
No songs, no songs.
We'll see what she has to say. So please give your attention to Lisa.
Yeah, should. I hope so. Yep, there we go. Yeah, it's down here somewhere. Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks for everybody who stuck around, and I can still see the female, so I don't think we're blizzarding too bad. So I appreciate sticking around for the last part of the day. Many of you know I've been in veterinary practice for 27 years, all of them with Dr. Steve Henry by my side, until he retired last October after 46 years of being a veterinarian himself. And in the 98 days of practice without Steve, I probably asked myself, what would Steve do at least 1,000 times? So that's an average of over 10 times a day for those of you that are math challenged. So I'll talk a little bit about how I met Steve Henry. So first of all, I know half of you are probably going, wow, Lisa, you look great. You haven't hardly changed. And the other half are going, was Mike 12 when you married him? So I grew up with beef cattle and horses, and only one of my neighbors had pigs. Incidentally, 2 of my neighbors raised mink for fur, which was really interesting to me, but I could kind of see that was a dying venture because at that time PETA was just getting warmed up. And so then during my high school years, I also worked on my aunt and uncle's dairy farm, and that's when I kind of began to understand real production agriculture. During college, I fell in love with pigs and the pork production industry. I had my first chance to work in that industry. And I also fell in love with a future swine nutritionist, so that kind of sort of sealed the deal. And when I was about to graduate from vet school, and Mike was finishing up on his PhD in swine nutrition, Mike revealed that his dream was to return to Kansas State University, where he had done his master's degree. Great, I thought, there's 100 swine vet practices in southern Minnesota, right, Tim? Maybe not so many now, but at that time it seemed like there was 100, and I only know of one guy who practices swine medicine in Kansas, some guy named Steve Henry that I met at a conference. So that's how it all happened. So who is this Steve Henry guy, the infamous Dr. Steve Henry? Well, if you look at him on paper, Steve's had 2 main jobs. He graduated in 1972 from Kansas State University, and from 72 to 76, he was a practitioner in Macomb, Illinois. And then from 76, he returned home. He's from Longford, Kansas, came back to Abilene, very near, and practiced until 2017. He retired on Halloween, by the way, and that was, Steve picked that. That's his kind of weird sense of humor. And he's been a practitioner and owner in Abilene Animal Hospital until his retirement. He's also been an adjunct professor at Kansas State and at University of Illinois. He's had many, many, many awards, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later. He served on over 30 committees, gave 150 presentations, 34 peer-reviewed papers, wrote 8 book chapters. I mean, who has time for that? But Steve has done all of these things. And so Steve Henry, every time he gets up to talk, he introduces himself as a general practitioner from Abilene, Kansas. That's a little like Bill Snyder saying, yeah, I coach some football. So one look at his 20-page resume will tell you otherwise. Thought I'd throw that up there for you, Dale. So what I've decided is I'm going to talk about 25 life lessons that I learned while practicing with Steve Henry. So 25 things that you can take home today and hopefully apply to your world. So first of all, I want to talk about my first month on the job. We did a herd visit to Dale Keysuckers, and so I Googled you, Dale, and I found this nice picture of Dale at a motorcycle convention, and he looks kind of Californian, like he's like super relaxed, but don't let it fool you, because a herd visit to Dale's was very intimidating as a new graduate. Terrifying, in fact. So the swine industry had just discovered that PRRS virus was the cause of mystery swine disease. And Steve did not skip a beat, introducing me to Dale and informing Dale that I was the new expert on PRRS virus at Abilene Animal Hospital because I had been to school more recently than Steve, and so I knew all the latest research. So Steve sets the bar with clients from the starting gate, that his new associate was probably going to be more valuable than he was, so I was certainly a bargain at the same price that he charged. And this definitely tells a new associate that you are a valued member of the team. And it also scares you to death because you have to live up to the expectations. So life lesson number 1 is people will rise to the expectations you have of them. Make sure you set the bar high. Sorry, this isn't the best picture, but this is a picture of Dr. Steve Henry and Dr. Dick Hesse. And when we had Steve's retirement party, we had a little fun. I emailed out of all of you that I had emails for, and I asked you to share some of your favorite Steve stories. And I thought if we got snowed in here, I could just stand up here and read from this book because it's really a lot of fun. There's our favorite stories of Dr. Steve Henry, and I have a little quote from Bob Rowland: "If God doesn't get you, Charles Darwin will," because that was one of Steve's favorite things. So anyway, I'm going to share a couple of stories out of here, but in Dick's comments when he was writing about Steve's retirement, he wrote, "You know, I was working for Intervet when I was introduced to Steve at a PRRS CAP meeting," so it's a group that helps with PRRS research, in Minnesota. And Steve said, "Oh, you're one of those pond scum-sucking something lowlifes." And Dick was really kind of shocked that Steve would say something like that in a professional meeting. And then Steve just smiled, and Dick said it was the start of a great friendship. So, but many times our Abilene Animal Hospital group has discussed how we're going to charge clients for the services that we offer. Many veterinary groups have had the very same discussions. You can be a veterinarian who sells your services and advises clients on what products are out there, what they might do, or you can sell products to your clients and give your services away as a reward for buying product from you, or you can be somewhere in between, and that's a very delicate balance. But Steve always pushed for service and offer the product at a minimal markup. So he was very much in favor of selling the service. And for practitioners, sometimes making a living focusing on selling service might make you less money, but you will certainly sleep well at night. It helps keep the focus on what's best for the pig because your recommendations will reflect your knowledge and not be clouded by how much money you might make in the end. So life lesson number 2 is always be honest and open. So we're going to talk a little bit about the pig doesn't lie. Now, I'm not insinuating that the pork producers out there are liars, but sometimes the information that we receive about what's actually going on doesn't always make sense. The information we get over the phone or via email doesn't always tell us exactly what's going on. The records don't always match the clinical picture. For example, if you're looking at the records and you saw, 12 pigs died in the finisher last week from ileitis, and then you go to the farm and you find out now they actually have gastric ulcers, that's two completely different things. Sometimes nursery managers tell you that they have a strep problem because there's a bunch of brainers in the nursery, and that's partially true, but getting to the farm and finding out that there's an underlying PRRS virus outbreak going on is a completely different story. So also photos and videos that we receive, sometimes it's been great because we have these smartphones and it closes the gap because we are sometimes a great distance from the farm or we can't go to the farm for biosecurity reasons. And so people send us photos or videos, and that can be great, although some of you need serious help with your photography and videography skills. And I wish I had $1 for every time a farm post-mortem picture came on my phone with the message, what do you think happened here, Doc? And it's just like some blurry thing that I can't even tell. I can barely tell that it's a pig. So the lesson I learned here from Steve is go to the farm. Take the time, look at the pigs never lie. You might miss a few diagnoses for not knowing, but you'll miss 100% for not looking. How many times have you said that, Steve? He says that to the students all the time. So Steve has a really incredible power of observation. He taught me to be patient, let the pig tell you the story of what's going on, and don't shoot from the hip because I kind of have a tendency to do that sometimes. So life lesson number 3, don't be lazy. So one of the things, another quote that Steve's been known to say is, in God we trust, all others must bring data. I think I've heard that out of Steve Dreetz's mouth before too. And actually tracked that down, and it comes, it originated from Edwards Deming. He's like a engineer, statistician, data scientist. Does a lot of work with group organizations, and the key to that is to know how to critically review scientific literature. There's a great deal of information out there, especially now with internet. There's even more information, but not all of it's true. Some of it is good research, some of it is terrible research, and a lot of it is somewhere in between. So make sure that you can tell the difference. Steve always critically reviews everything. Peer-reviewed articles in scientific journals. He's been on the editorial board, reviewed lots of papers. He reviews presentations at conferences. He even reviews things that he's heard on NPR on his way to work. And then he has to come and research and find out if what they said was true. But he especially reviews information given to him by salesmen. He combs through their information, and he's really quick to point out any discrepancies, overinterpretation of the data, whatever he might find on the glossy brochure. He's probably, the glossier the brochure, the more critical he's going to be. So lesson number 4 is always do your own homework. When I was a veterinary student at University of Minnesota, BSH, before Steve Henry, I actually spent another couple of weeks with another well-known swine vet who's in the audience today, Dr. Tim Lula. And Tim, you probably don't remember this, but we were visiting a finishing facility that was an old, partially slatted, modified open front with what seemed like 40-watt light bulbs covered in fly specks. So it wasn't your place. I was still in Minnesota at that time. So it was kind of difficult to see, and Dr. Lula was quiet as we walked through, and he asked me my opinion when we reached the last pen, and I remember being really nervous and commenting on the variability of the size of the pigs, the fact that the pigs were piling a little, coughing a little, and then Tim said, which pen had the dead pig in it? And I had not seen it, and Tim reminded me that part of my job was to be a keen observer and look at every pig, and I have never forgotten that. So another, of course, Steve has a lot of similarities in that way, And another little story, I'm going to share a little story out of the retirement book. Whoops, sorry about that. This is some comments that were submitted by Wayne Cass, and I haven't seen Wayne today. I don't know if he's here, but this was Wayne's comments about Steve. Steve is a teacher. I do not recall a conversation where I did not learn something. Sometimes the learning came after the conversation, like looking up what pyelonephritis is or what prodromal means. Steve is generous with his time. He's good about returning my calls or answering my emails, and even more amazing, he always seems happy to hear from me, even the one time when I called when he was on vacation. Steve is a good listener, and he's respectful of your thoughts, and I always feel like he hears me and he considers my opinion and values my experiences. Steve is a keen observer. He lets the pigs tell us the answer is his mantra. You would think after looking at over 1 million pigs, he would become calloused or indifferent or complacent, but he is as excited to go see the pigs as anyone I know. Hunters talk about how good wild turkeys can see. I do not know the extent of wild turkeys' vision, but I know they are always looking, and Dr. Steve is like that. He's always looking. So, life lesson number 5 is always look like it's the first time you've seen it. I also think this is a funny picture because I know some of you, whenever Steve gets out a camera, goes, oh no, I think Kellen Kofer said at one time, like, I hate it when Steve gets out the camera because that means he doesn't know the answer. Al Lehman was a swine practitioner at University of Minnesota when I was a student. He left the university to start Swine Graphics in Webster City, Iowa. Al and Steve were great friends. They loved to quiz each other on tough cases. And Steve and Al had a peer group of swine veterinarians that met once a year at one of the group's members' practice. And they usually toured a client farm and they critiqued each other. So when I graduated in 1990, Steve encouraged me to start up a peer group of my own, and so I did. And in the fall of 1991, we decided we would invite both groups to Kansas, and we would host them together, sort of the old dogs and the new pups. And we toured Steve's brother Roy's farm when it was still a gilt multiplier for PIC. And we had a great time bantering back and forth. And in the evening, the old guard gave short presentations on what they thought had been important in their careers thus far. And Al gave a great presentation on how he always looked himself in the mirror and asked, would you hire you? And Steve and I have asked ourselves that question many times over the years because we thought it was very thought-provoking, and it forced you to look at yourself from the eyes of the client. Unfortunately, Dr. Lehman died the very next year in 1992 of a heart attack, and Steve was always sad about that. It was a really big loss to the swine industry and the loss of a dear personal friend. I was grateful to rub elbows with all the heavy hitters that fall. It was inspiring. Steve acted all excited to meet the future American Association of Swine Veterinarians, but those of us who were newly minted veterinarians know that we were the real beneficiaries of that meeting. So life lesson number 6 is critically evaluate yourself and your work. Now, some of you were raised right by your mothers, and you always show respect by referring to us as doctor. And Steve has always preferred to be just Steve, or just Doc, or whatever you want to call him. And he likes it that way, and we kind of like it that way. Just call him Steve. And so here's Steve with my life lesson number 7, don't be pretentious. And so here he is showing you how to make tamales. I've seen Steve carry on meaningful conversations in the boardroom, in the classroom, in Washington, D.C., and at every level on the farm. He's taught me that everyone brings value. He knows how to ask the right questions, and he knows how to listen. I've watched him in awe as CEOs of companies give presentations on how things are done within the company, and Steve will quickly point out that he was just visiting with the power washer at the farm the day before and shared the observation that he had at the slat level that didn't really meet with what the CEO was saying was the company policy. Steve can be very patient with people who are young and inexperienced, taking the time to explain things such as why you can't warm up semen up in the microwave, or that the diamond skin disease in pigs is called erysipelas, not erysipelas. On the other hand, he can be very biting when he thinks that you might be taking advantage of someone or not being completely forthcoming with your information. Steve bolstered the confidence of my son Rogan when he worked at Abilene Animal Hospital during high school as the kennel technician and groundskeeper by teaching him how to become more valuable, and showed him how to change a light ballast and string internet cables through the attic. So he can charge us more money, right, Steve? When my youngest daughter, Fiona, informed Steve that she was going to become an interior designer, Steve promptly hired her at a whopping $10 an hour to paint his office, hang new blinds, and rehang all his diplomas and awards. And a few weeks later, Steve, on Craigslist, was it, Megan? Craigslist, he bought this big credenza because he decided he needed a bigger, better desk. And so then he needed all his diplomas and awards rehung because they didn't fit the new desk. And so he called Fiona back, my daughter, and she complained a bit, like, I just rehung those. And Steve gently reminded her that the customer is always right. And besides, ka-ching, ka-ching, she would be making more money hanging the same stuff. A few months later, amazingly enough, we decided we didn't like the office arrangement, so we changed spaces again, and Steve moved. He again contacted Fiona to rehang his stuff and refill all the nail holes from where he had his stuff before, and Fiona just looked at him and said, ka-ching, ka-ching. So, life lesson number 8, see the best in everyone. Many times, I have observed Dr. Henry take up a cause that he is passionate about. In 1994, it was a tough time in the swine industry due to low pig prices. The K-State Swine Nutrition Group had published information on bidding feed ingredients. Some of the feed companies were trying to hold on to the margins that were built into their products. Some companies thought they could stop the change if they silenced the K-State nutritionists. For almost a year, they bombarded the department head and the dean of the College of Agriculture with angry letters calling for the nutritionists' dismissal and silencing of them. When the pressure became too great, it was Steve who fired off a 17-page missive detailing all the accusations from several feed companies, and the fax machine was the weapon of choice in those days, and our office manager spent all day at the fax machine sending out a call of duty to all of you producers. Many of you in the room remember this. And of course, you all responded with numerous phone calls and letters to President Weefald and many other administrators, and that immediately turned the tide. In a short span of time, they went from worrying about losing their jobs to being hailed by President Weefald as national heroes. So most of you also know the story of when the television crew from 2020 came to town and visited Leo and Sharon Schwartz's farm. And Steve and Sharon carefully explained how judiciously antibiotics were used in their system, and the beauty of it was the story never aired because it was too boring and too logical and not sensational enough. When the vitamin price fixing lawsuit came out, it was Steve who helped the Kansas producers file their claims, get through all the paperwork, and get back their portion of the settlement. So today, when there are swine or veterinary lawsuits, there are actually law firms that want to hire Steve to keep him on their side to prevent the other side from having him. So I'm telling you, if I was in a lawsuit opposite of Steve, I would just settle. I just want to be on that side. So, life lesson number 9, never underestimate the power of one. This is my absolute favorite photo of Steve Henry because it is quintessential Steve. So Steve, Megan Potter, and I were just leaving to drive to Denver for the annual ASV, the Swine Practitioners Meeting, when a client with a small show pig herd called with an obstetrical issue. Steve just knew that we could not leave town with all the swine vets in one car without helping him first. We have time, he assured us. We stopped on the way, delivered the piglet log jam, and drove 8 hours to Denver with a slight hog barn smell in the car. So it wasn't really a big deal to us, but it probably did mean a great deal to the client and, of course, to the piglets that he saved. So many of you have received phone calls or emails or even 17-page herd letters from Steve at all hours of the day or night. Steve's mantra, we have time. So lesson number 10, try to always have time when someone needs you. Some of you might know that my oldest daughter studies theater. We don't know how you cross a swine nutritionist and a swine veterinarian and you get a theater student, but somehow that happened. We tell her she's a genetic mutation. Unfortunately, she does understand enough about science to get that. But she also loves improv comedy. And one of the things in improv comedy is yes and. So yes and thinking is a rule of thumb in improvisational comedy that suggests that the participant should accept whatever the other participant has stated and then expand on that line of thinking. So this is also used in business and other organizations as a principle that improves the effectiveness of the brainstorming process. It fosters effective communication and encourages free sharing of ideas. I'm pretty sure that Steve has never spent any time doing improvisational comedy, and he's not gone to theater school, but he is great at this. He is actually the king of getting participation from everyone and encouraging them with the yes and rule. He values everyone's ideas. So life lesson number 11, promote teamwork. When things go bad in the swine industry and everyone else is running around like Chicken Little screaming that the sky is falling, Steve will be there scratching his head, thinking of a new approach or a different way to look at it. He always reminds us that they call it veterinary practice for a reason. So he's very good at coming up with new ideas to solve problems. So a couple of them that maybe didn't work out so well I thought I'd throw out there, Steve, like the time when Steve said, I'm sure that we can figure out this humpback pig problem. This was years ago. We kind of have that figured out now, but I'm sure we can figure out this problem if we just x-ray the pigs. So, needless to say, somehow you missed out on the x-raying process. It was me and a student that x-rayed a bunch of pigs, and that didn't really get us very far. And then when Megan came along, Megan says, do you think there's a possibility that mice might be harboring new strains of PRRS virus? And Steve says, well, I don't know, but I definitely think you should find out. So she had her at a farm that had some, we had seen some live mice. She set up live traps and trapped these mice. And Steve even helped make this little dissecting board where she could dissect the mice and get the tissues and submit tissue samples. And so you should all be relieved that she did not find PRRS virus in the mice, but that was a question that was out there at that time. So life lesson number 12, always think outside the box. Sorry, I don't know if you can see this very well, but this is Steve and Roy as kids, and I think even early on here you can sort of tell who was the intellect and who was going to be causing trouble. One of the other stories I want to share with you that came in when we were putting Steve's retirement book together, This comes from Dr. Tim Blackwell, who's a veterinarian up in Ontario, and this is Tim's story. Steve Henry is my go-to guy on all questions swine, as well as a plethora of other topics. Long before Google, I had Steve Henry. One of my earliest encounters with the man was during my graduate work at University of Minnesota, where I was employed as the ambulatory clinician. And I was assigned the task of purchasing a farm camera for the ambulatory group. And I was told to research all the pros and the cons of the various makes and models, do a cost-benefit analysis, and fill out a requisition form with my top 3 choices, including detailed explanations for all their rankings. Sounds like a university kind of thing, doesn't it, Jason? I had no knowledge of cameras and really not a whole lot of interest in developing the necessary expertise. So I told Al Lehman that, hey, I'm the wrong guy for this assignment. And he said, hey, just call Steve Henry and find out what kind of camera Steve Henry uses. So because that would be the one to buy. So he filled out the formal, he just called Steve and he asked him, and he filled out the formal university requisition with Steve's recommendation. I don't remember, it was like a Canon one-shot or something. And I listed it as the first, the second, and the third. And I put Dr. Henry recommended it as the sole justification on the application. The requisition was immediately approved, and all the ambulatory staff raved and raved about what a great and practical camera I had chosen. To this day, despite having Google at my fingertips, I sometimes rely on Steve Henry for the right answer on all matter of questions. I will always be in his debt. Thank you, Steve, for everything you've done for me and for our profession. Dr. Tim Blackwell. This is so true. I learned this early on, that producers go to Steve for things that aren't even related to swine veterinary medicine. He expanded from disease diagnostics to ventilation to cash flow projections, expansion plans, and even when he didn't know, he would bring in a nutritionist or an engineer. In my early days, Pat Murphy went to a lot of farms with us, trying to figure out how to do a redneck remodel, right, Pat? Or some other expert that is going to help the producer. So life lesson number 13 is be the go-to guy. I think pharmaceutical companies, salespeople actually draw straws to see who has to come visit Dr. Henry. He has a reputation of raking them over the coals. And so I made this dartboard because I was thinking about selling it to the pharmaceutical companies for a profit. As many of you know, a lot of companies have some sort of incentive program or rewards program, as they call it, and Steve just sits down with them and says, what's the kickback going to be this year? Another thing, it was Steve who called for full disclosure of conflicts of interest in research during our professional meetings. So now it's a very common procedure for people to give full disclosure at the beginning of their talk as to like who funded certain projects. He just wants to point out the possibility of inherent biases. He's not saying you're biased, he's just saying be open and honest, which if you're following along, that was one of my previous life lessons. So. One time at an ASV meeting, though, Steve was giving a talk on cost of therapy in nursery and finishing pigs. And he's laughing because he knows what story I'm going to tell. Dr. Steve Dritz had, and he's laughing too, had put together this handy little spreadsheet that calculated drug costs based on how many pigs and what they weighed. And Steve, of course, took it one step further, like he often does, and added in all the little incentives that companies were offering. And so at that particular time, one company was giving away free flexible snake light flashlights for every case of their drug that you purchased. And so every time Steve suggested in his talk about using that drug, he would give the cost and then he would tell the group the price, but then he would add, oh, don't forget though, you just got 2 more snake lights. The veterinarian representing the company was in the audience and was actually a close friend of Steve's. but he'd had enough, and he blurted out, "Steve, I'm going to tell you where you can put that snake light." Steve can kind of be like that. He's a little bit like a sliver. He gets under your skin, and he can just fester there a little bit. So, life lesson number 14, call it like it is. So, lest you think that I'm here to nominate Steve Henry for sainthood, there are indeed times that even Steve tires of the same conversation over and over for the most bullheaded of you, or especially if you're giving him a sales call. So one trick that he passed on to Megan and I was hang up while you're still talking, because nobody ever thinks that you're hanging up on them if you're still talking. Life lesson number 15, everyone has their limits, even Steve. Steve loves to learn. This is Steve and Banji, featured on the cover of Smoky Hill Currents magazine for their efforts in Banji's catering business, Apple Mint Catering. Steve just knows something about everything. I have called Steve for information on all kinds of things. How to lay paver stones, how to unclog your pellet grill, how to lay tile, how to make jalapeno poppers, when to trim my trees, how to get water out of my basement, especially when my husband's out of town and my basement is flooding, how to invest for retirement, where to find tuba music for a solo competition that my daughter's in, and she's a tuba player, and so is Steve's dad, and how to set up a wireless router. Steve is just always giving information. He gives information to Megan on what genetic line of tomatoes she should plant. It's the Florida 91. That's the genetic line, right, Megan? How to fix her deck, what tools she should buy to last in her toolbox. So the list goes on and on and on. And one of mine and Megan's biggest fears is that Steve's going to start blocking our calls. So, life lesson number 16, be a lifelong learner. Steve has served on so many committees, both veterinary related and not veterinary related. People either love having Steve on their board because he's a great idea guy, or they hate having him on the board because he is definitely not a yes man. So again, that goes back to the power of one. Sometimes he's the last man standing. We average about 12 veterinary student interns a year, plus numerous high school and college students who think they want to be veterinarians. So I figure that's probably over 500 students in your time, Steve, that you have guided or ruined, depending on how you want to look at it. One of Steve's favorite things to do, and I always thought this was kind of mean, but it's actually really a life lesson for the student, is Steve loves to get out the financial calculator when they're driving, long trip back from a farm, and he'll get the student engaged in conversation, and with the financial calculator, he'll say, so how much debt do you think you're going to have when you get out of vet school? And the student will tell him, and of course, those of you been following that along, it's increasing because the veterinary school price, well, college price in general is rising, so the debt number keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And then he punches that in, and well, what's the interest rate? And he always quizzes them, like, how much do you think you're going to be paying per month? And amazingly, a lot of times the students really have no idea, which is kind of scary. And so Steve takes it upon himself to inform them about what percentage of their income is probably going to be going to paying off their student loan debt. And numerous times we've had students come back from the farm in tears, and I'm like, Steve did the financial talk. So Steve's also a master at mobilizing the masses when something needs to be done. So when I'm in the middle of the crisis, I actually want Steve to be on my side. Life lesson number 17, be generous with your time. Steve's always pointing out that pork producers are some of the most resourceful and resilient people that he knows, and I agree. That's kind of what migrated me towards the pork side of veterinary medicine. That's why he enjoys working with them, and that's why I enjoy working with you. And he's always reminding us that, you know, we can solve the new disease crisis. We can survive until the pig price rallies. And when producers ask, what are we going to do if gestation stalls are banned? Steve's answer is, we're going to keep producing pork tomorrow. So, and that's really true. I mean, we're resilient people, and we're going to figure out ways to solve these problems, just like Gary alluded to in his previous talk, that there are obstacles out there, but we're smart people, and we're going to figure out ways to work around it. So life lesson number 18, be optimistic. Oh, sorry, that's kind of dark, but this is a picture of Steve and his granddaughter, Helen, practicing the cello. Steve's been a great mentor to many people, a lot of you in this room and a lot of students beyond, including Dr. Potter and myself in our swine practice, but also other vets in our practice, regardless of their discipline, if they're small animal or equine or bovine, and hordes of veterinary students who intern with us every year. As a matter of fact, one such student, Dr. Trevor Martin, who's sitting out here, he was a veterinary student intern. Raise your hand, Trevor. Come on, this is free advertising. And Trevor just rejoined us. This is his second week in practice. So, and he was a student intern of ours and kept in touch with us over the years. Spent the last 8 years up in Northwest Iowa, and now he's come home to help Megan and I stop drowning. So Steve has also mentored many swine farm managers, young diagnosticians, young musicians, including Helen, his granddaughter, my oldest daughter, Sage, who plays the tuba. But the interesting thing about Steve is that never, ever does he refer to himself as a mentor. And as a matter of fact, I truly believe that Steve doesn't even see it as mentoring. He always feels like he's learning just as much from them as they are learning from him. So life lesson number 19, be humble and selfless. Part of what makes Steve such a great mentor is that he truly lives life with rose-colored glasses on most of the time. He's blind to biases that often get in the way of other people's ability to learn from others or build new bridges. I've never met another person who truly does not care about your gender, your race, your religious beliefs, where you graduated from or didn't graduate from, weird ideas you might have, whether or not you grew up on a farm or in an urban jungle, whether you make 6 figures or you draw from welfare. Steve only cares whether you care about pigs, you care about people, you care about agriculture, and whether you, like him, are ready to listen and open your mind to new ideas. I share this picture of me when I was elected to the executive board of the Association of Swine Veterinarians because it reminds me of a really great story. When I was first elected to the board of this great organization, we had an executive director who I would definitely call old school, not the one we have right now. Just in case, Tim, if you're taking this back. When I was elected, the director was making an enormous deal out of the fact that I was the first woman to serve on the board. And he enthusiastically shook Steve's hand and announced, "Isn't this a monumental day for the organization?" And Steve looked him straight in the eye with a straight face and matching enthusiasm and said, "I know, it's very exciting to have our first red-haired director." Life lesson number 20. Keep your biases from limiting your opinions of people. This is 2002. Steve was awarded the Howard Dunn Memorial Award given by the Association of Swine Veterinarians for people who have given service to the industry above and beyond the call of duty. And part of my point here is, this is a family affair, so this is Steve's parents, Jim and Helen, and the whole rest of the Henry clan there to help him receive his award because they work together and they play together. Steve truly enjoys being a swine veterinarian, and this is reflected in the many, many awards he has received. Science with Practice Award from Iowa State University, He's an alumni fellow at Kansas State University. He's a distinguished veterinary alumni from Kansas State University, the Howard Dunn in 2002. He was the Alan D. Lehman Science in Practice Award recipient, of which he was the first one to receive that award. He's been the Allied Industry Award from Kansas Pork Association. He's been the president of ASV. He's been the Swine Practitioner of the Year. So he has many, many awards. And my life lesson out of this, number 21, is if you're going to live to work or work to live, Steve has always chosen to live to work. That being said, it's still good to have outside interests. Steve does have many hobbies. I love this picture because, as some of you may or may not know, Steve plays the cello in the Salina Orchestra. And one of their marketing ploys one year was they were like, well, we're going to show that our orchestra people are not full-time orchestra people. They actually have other jobs. And so they had to come to the photo shoot in their work clothes. And they really wanted Steve to bring a pig, right, Steve? But that really, from a biosecurity standpoint, we didn't think it would be good if you brought a pig for the photo shoot and then killed it in the back because you couldn't take it, couldn't take it back to the farm for biosecurity reasons. So we decided to settle on a dog, and there's a little bird here, too, if you don't see the bird. So we decided to emphasize the veterinarian aspect. But he is wearing his traditional blue coveralls that most of you know him by, and his work boots. So I thought that was really fun. So anyway, Steve has a lot of hobbies: cello playing, gardening, remodeling, tinkering in his garage mahal. If you haven't had the chance to visit his home, he has quite the tool shop. Cooking, and of course, being a grandpa. So life lesson number 22, take time to have hobbies. When you spend as many hours in the week as you do with your veterinary team, you know each other like family. Steve is always there when the chips are down, a personal crisis arises, conflicts are causing waves in the system. He has a really great sense to knowing when to push and when to back off in order to try to solve the problems. And sorry, Trevor, we haven't taken a new picture yet, so we don't have an updated one with him in it. Well, we'd have to cut Steve out and then put Trevor in. It'd be kind of awkward. So Steve's kind of like the team cheerleader minus the skirt and the pom-poms. So lesson number 23, always be willing to take one for the team. So those of you that have middle schoolers might understand that in middle school they start learning about statistics a little bit, and sometimes they have to draw Venn diagrams. So I thought I'd draw my own Venn diagram for you. So this purple circle here represents things that Steve Henry knows about pork production, and then the green circle represents things that Lisa Tokach knows about pork production. And so I just want to point out, of course, that my circle is much smaller. And I also want to point out that this 20% maybe of my circle that's outside here is common industry audit, pork quality assurance, and trucker quality assurance, and human resources. So all the things that Steve hates to do. It was Steve that pushed us all to obtain advanced degrees beyond our DVMs. Something that would push our boundaries and set us apart as experts in our field. So when I followed Steve's footsteps and I went for board certification in swine health management practice through the American Board of Veterinary Practitioners, it was a challenge for me. The three-year program culminated into 3 days of final exams in Chicago. A written exam, essays, long essays, and oral examinations. So Steve was anxiously awaiting my call at the end to let him know how it had gone for me. And I called him in a screaming fit because one of the essay questions was, see if I get it right, Steve, explain how a 10-cent rise in a bushel of corn affects the profitability of all aspects of a farrow-to-finish operation. I knew without asking that that was Steve Henry's question, and I was really mad at him. So anyway, his circle is actually not bigger than mine because he's unwilling to share. He's just smarter than me. So life lesson number 24, always share your knowledge. Steve was gracious even in his exit from Abilene Animal Hospital. He started his partnership buyout while he was still employed by Abilene Animal Hospital so he could help fund his own exit. He worked with us to try to make the transition smooth with all of our clients, ensuring both sides that everything was going to be okay. He gave us his opinions on how to proceed, but only when asked. Unfortunately, some systems have trouble with the exit strategy, whether it be in a veterinary practice or on the farm or in the university, because the retiree just cannot give up control, doesn't like the direction the program is going, or just can't let go of power, thus becoming a roadblock to future progress. Steve was not like that. Life lesson number 25, bow out gracefully. So, that's my 25 life lessons learned while practicing with Steve Henry. I thought I'd put them all in one spot if you wanted to see them all at one time. But I could have probably wrote 50, but I didn't think you guys wanted to be here all day. That's kind of what it boils down to me. So many things learned over time. So I just want to say thank you, Steve, for changing us all for the better and being the best mentor, even though I know you hate that word, the best mentor that I could ever have. Thank you. Go ahead. Yeah, I'll just shake his hand.
Steve, could we have you come up to the stage here just real quickly, one last time?
And for those that don't know, Steve had shoulder surgery on Friday, so I was just telling him that you had shoulder surgery on Friday, so try not to slap him on the back.
We really wanted to show our appreciation to Steve for everything that he's done for our industry here at the state level, but also on the national level as well, too. And we've already heard, Steve, about all the plaques and the awards that you've won and how your walls are already covered and moved. And thank you also for supporting Fiona's future college fund right there as well, too. But in the spirit of your retirement, we figured the only thing that we could really give you were some K-State beer mugs. And so hopefully you can enjoy those in the future. And thanks for everything you've done for our industry. They might be full.
Thank you. I really expected an award for bravery for flying Lisa while pregnant in the airplane during the summer when the pressure altitude was quite high. She really has phenomenal self-control. Thank you all. It's been wonderful.